Here's the reworked version of your text, rewritten according to your guidelines. Evelyn was a strikingly athletic woman, her beauty undeniable to anyone who met her. However, many people seem to emphasize the past when they talk about her, highlighting the word was. For me, though, her beauty remained timeless. Before diving into the story, I think it's important to give a little context about myself, Rob Warfield, because my background plays a big role in everything that unfolds. Until the age of 14, I wasn't exactly what you'd call a model kid. I was what many would label a juvenile delinquent. I had a habit of getting into fistfights, not because I was provoked, but simply because I was tough and had something to prove. Bullying came naturally to me back then. I picked on other kids, shoplifted from stores, and even stole from locals in my town. There was one incident where, with the help of a few older friends, I took a car for a joyride just for a few hours, but it was enough to land me in serious trouble. When I turned 14, things took a sharp turn. My parents, completely worn out and unable to handle my behavior anymore, placed me into foster care. I know that foster care horror stories are a dime a dozen, but I was lucky. My experience was nothing like that. My foster parents were tough, no-nonsense types who ran a tight ship. They were more businesslike than nurturing, but that worked for me. My foster dad had played lacrosse during his college years, and one of my foster brothers, who was a year older than me, was already on a lacrosse team. I didn't have much at the time, but by taking on various odd jobs, I scraped together enough money to buy my own lacrosse stick. My foster parents encouraged, actually they insisted, that I join a local lacrosse league. I started training regularly with my foster dad and brother, and it wasn't long before I realized I had a knack for the sport. As I grew, my physique naturally developed into what some might call ideal for a lacrosse forward. By the time I turned 18, I was exactly 6 feet 1 inch, or 186 centimeters, without shoes, and weighed a solid 194 pounds, 88 kilograms. I graduated from high school not only as a better person but as a skilled athlete. In fact, I was good enough to earn a scholarship to a Big Ten university. From my sophomore year onward, I started as a forward for 3 consecutive years. By the time I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, I had multiple impressive job offers waiting for me. Shortly after college, I met Jasmine, who would later become my wife. She was a marketing specialist and a graduate of an ACC university. We were both 24 when we tied the knot, and life as a young, dynamic couple was as exciting as we'd hoped. At 26, Jasmine and I relocated to North Carolina in search of better career opportunities. It was there that we met Evelyn Simmons and her husband, Brett. Evelyn and Brett were a few years older than us, probably 3 or 4, and they were, without a doubt, the most attractive couple we had ever encountered. Stories often exaggerate a woman's looks, but in Evelyn's case, no embellishment was needed. From the moment I first met her, I genuinely believed she had never walked into a room without being the most stunning woman there. That had likely been the case since she was 18. I may not be an authority on male attractiveness, but judging by how women reacted to Brett, he was almost as extraordinary as Evelyn in terms of looks. At first, Evelyn struck me as a bit reserved, stiff even, but beneath that exterior, it was clear she was kind-hearted, empathetic, and surprisingly intelligent. Her shyness stood out as an unexpected trait, especially given her beauty and confidence in other areas. Through Evelyn and Brett, we became part of a social circle that included other couples in North Carolina's Research Triangle. Among them were Cindy and Dale, Sue and Rick, and Mandy and Carl. It was a lively group, and for the most part we enjoyed spending time together. But after a few months in North Carolina, I began noticing a subtle shift in Jasmine and some of the other women in our group. They seemed to grow colder, almost as if they were looking down on me. At first, I couldn't put my finger on why. Then, one day, as I worked on a project in the kitchen, I overheard a conversation between Jasmine and 2 of her friends. That was when everything started to make sense. I was just outside the kitchen area of our home, enjoying the fresh air of a pleasant spring day. The windows were wide open, letting the sounds of chatter drift my way. "God, Jazz." Cindy's sharp tone caught my attention. Jazz, of course, was the nickname Jasmine's friends had given her, though I never called her that. That woman, Evelyn, Really knows how to freeze me out," Cindy continued, sounding both annoyed and bitter. "Did you see how my husband drools over her every time she's around?" Her voice dropped into a growl, brimming with frustration. "She's the hottest one in the room, and it's like she can't help but flaunt it." Sue chimed in, her tone equally sharp. "Rick and I had our biggest fight because he was being so obvious about staring at her. Worse than Dale, acting like a lovesick teenager." "Rob's not that blatant," Jasmine said, cutting in. "But let's be honest, like every caveman we're married to, I'm sure he stares at her too, hiding behind those aviator sunglasses of his." Her words stung in a way I hadn't expected. "I'd love to knock that little temptress down a peg," Cindy giggled, the malice in her tone unmistakable. Sue laughed along with her, amused by the word temptress. From there, the conversation spiraled. They continued to criticize Evelyn, mocking her with names that were not only unfair but outright cruel. This went on for a good 5 minutes before I'd had enough. To put an end to their slanderous gossip, I made my presence known. I stepped through the side door and into the kitchen, announcing myself loudly as I entered. "Oh, hi, Sue." "Hi, Cindy," I said, smiling as if I hadn't heard a word of their conversation. "What's going on?" Jasmine gave me one of her polished smiles, the kind she saved for social niceties. "Just a little girl talk," she replied sweetly, letting me kiss her on the cheek as though everything was perfectly fine. I played along, chatting briefly with them while sipping a bottle of iced tea. After a few minutes, I mentioned that I'd be working on some odd jobs just outside the kitchen windows. Not long after, Sue and Cindy left, effectively ending their little bring Evelyn down session, for the moment at least. Their conversation had left me unsettled. It wasn't just the way they talked about Evelyn. It was also the hypocrisy. Both Sue and Cindy had flirted with me in the past. And I don't mean casual, playful banter. I mean unmistakable advances. Yet they had the audacity to label Evelyn, who had always conducted herself with dignity, as a temptress. Jasmine's behavior also troubled me deeply. She wasn't the same woman I'd married. Either she had changed since our move to North Carolina, or I was finally seeing a side of her I hadn't noticed before. A snide, mean-spirited side that left me questioning her character. Whenever our social group got together, the women never openly ostracized Evelyn in mixed company, likely because of Brett's undeniable charisma and attractiveness. I made a conscious effort to treat Evelyn kindly, as if to compensate for the subtle ways the women excluded her. She never dressed provocatively or sought attention. Her beauty, grace, and poise were simply unhideable. It was who she was. About a year into our time in the Research Triangle, tragedy struck. Evelyn was involved in a severe car accident that left her with significant injuries. She lost her left leg below the knee, and the left side of her face was permanently scarred despite months of surgeries and rehabilitation. No surgeon, no matter how skilled, could fully undo the damage. What saddened me most wasn't just Evelyn's physical transformation but how the other women responded to it. While they feigned sympathy in her presence, I overheard conversations where they sounded almost delighted by her misfortune. I wouldn't have been shocked if at least Cindy, Mandy, and Sue felt relieved that the temptress had been taken down a notch. I prayed Jasmine wasn't among them, but my faith in her was wavering. Evelyn's mistreatment wasn't my only grievance. Over the next 6 months, I grew increasingly dissatisfied with the other men in our group: Brett, Rick, Dale, and Carl. They all had played football for small Division III colleges and seemed to think that gave them some kind of superiority over me. They dismissed my Big Ten lacrosse experience as if it didn't measure up. I never bothered explaining the vast difference in athletic caliber between Division III and the Big Ten. Felt like a waste of energy. Meanwhile, Jasmine became more distant. She showed less affection than she had during our early years of marriage, and her snide remarks grew more frequent. Materialism seemed to consume her thoughts, replacing the warmth and humor I'd once loved about her. Whenever I tried to address these changes, she brushed them off. She'd say her perspectives were simply maturing, or she'd accuse me of being overly sensitive. As for the men, I only spent time with them during group events. The camaraderie I'd hoped to find wasn't there, and the more I got to know them, the less I liked them. Spending time with the other husbands from our social circle had grown tedious, so I decided to branch out. I joined a recreational softball league, started taking tennis lessons, and found a new group of male friends who were easier to get along with. It was refreshing to spend time with people who didn't come with the baggage of judgment or competition. The first major event following Evelyn's accident happened about 3 months after she left the hospital. I had visited her a few times while she was recovering, helped her connect with a reputable rehabilitation center, and saw to it that she was fitted with a prosthetic leg. She was making progress, though I could tell it was a difficult journey for her. One morning, while I was out for a run in the local park, I passed a secluded grove with a few benches nestled under a canopy of trees. I heard the unmistakable sound of someone crying. Concerned, I paused my run and stepped into the grove, unsure of what I'd find. Sitting on one of the benches, with her head in her hands, was Evelyn. I approached her quietly, taking a seat beside her and gently touching her hand. She flinched at the contact but quickly relaxed when she realized it was me. Without saying a word, she leaned her head against my shoulder and let the tears continue to fall. I held her and stayed silent, giving her the space to cry until the storm of emotions began to settle. After a few minutes, Evelyn straightened up, wiped her face, and tried to compose herself. "I'm sorry you had to see me like this, Rob," she said, her voice a mixture of apology and embarrassment. "It's just one of those days." "You don't have to apologize," I replied gently. "Evelyn, you've been through so much. If it were me, I'd be struggling too." "I feel like I'm being so shallow," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I hate that I care so much about how I look now. I can't do the things I used to love, like sports. I can't wear the clothes that used to make me feel confident. I used to take so much pride in my appearance, and now, I just feel broken." She gave a faint, self-deprecating smile. "You're not shallow," I told her. "You're just adjusting, and that takes time. But I can see you're resigning yourself to this, and you don't have to. Your life can still be every bit as fulfilling as it was before." She let out a bitter scoff and turned her head to the side, revealing the scars on the left side of her face. "Not with this," she said, tapping her scarred cheek. "And definitely not with this," she added, tapping her prosthetic leg, which made a metallic sound. "You're wrong," I said firmly. "So, maybe you're not in the top 100th percentile for looks anymore. But you're not far off. And besides, beauty isn't just skin deep. There are people out there with far more challenging disabilities than yours who are living full, active lives." Evelyn looked at me skeptically, her brows furrowing. "Why do you say that? You know it's not true." "I look awful. At least Brett seems to think so." Couldn't help but smirk. "Oh, come on," I said teasingly. She slapped my arm and cursed under her breath. "It's not funny," she snapped. "Yes, it is," I said, smiling at her. "Because it's ridiculous for you to think you're anything less than stunning. Any man would be lucky to have you. And if Brett doesn't see that, then maybe he's the shallow one." After a long pause, she sighed. "You must be blind." "Nope," I replied. "My eyesight's pretty good, actually. What I think you need is a fresh perspective." I paused for a moment, then offered, "How about this? Why don't we meet twice a week? We'll work on your mobility together. I'll go wherever you want so that if you face any challenges or feel self-conscious, I'll be there to help. And maybe, just maybe, my attention will convince you that you're every bit as beautiful as I say you are." Evelyn hesitated, protesting at first, but eventually, she agreed. We started small, with a walk along the park trail. When she got tired, I carried her the last few hundred yards back to her car. From then on, we met twice a week for mobility sessions. Over time, I noticed she began wearing makeup again, carefully applying it to minimize the scars on her face. I made no effort to hide my time with Evelyn from Jasmine. In fact, I even invited her to join us, thinking her support could be helpful. But Jasmine dismissed the idea with barely a second thought, and her indifference rubbed me the wrong way. After about 6 weeks, Evelyn's attitude and mobility had improved noticeably. But during one of our sessions, she opened up about a growing concern. Brett was becoming distant, cold even, and she was convinced he was having an affair. When she shared her suspicions, I sat her down and listened carefully. While I wasn't entirely convinced she was right, I could see how much it weighed on her. Since she was a good friend by then, I offered to help her find out the truth. "When do you think he's most likely up to something?" I asked. "Saturday mornings," she said quietly. "It seems to happen most often then." "Well," I replied, "how about this? I can disable his car one Saturday, set up a tracker on your car, and make him take yours instead. I have access to some advanced tech, occupational perk of being an electrical engineer. If he's sneaking around, we'll find out." Evelyn looked at me with a mix of hesitation and hope. "You'd really do that for me?" "Absolutely," I said. "You deserve to know the truth." "You'll call me Friday night," I told Evelyn. "Once you're sure Brett won't be needing his car that evening. Leave the side garage door unlocked, and I'll take care of everything." A broad smile spread across her face, and to my surprise, she leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. I smiled back, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. The second major event unfolded when I finally put my plan into action. On Friday evening, I received Evelyn's coded message. "My prosthetic leg hurts tonight. Got any suggestions?" That was my cue. I excused myself from the party Jasmine and I were attending, telling her I was heading out to grab more ice for the host. Under the cover of night, I slipped into Evelyn's garage, quickly disabled a critical circuit in Brett's car's ignition system, and attached a small magnetic tracker to the wheel well of Evelyn's car. The entire operation took no more than 4 minutes. On my way back, I made sure to pick up some ice to maintain the cover story and return to the party as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Jasmine was off doing her usual Saturday shopping with either Sue or Cindy. I couldn't remember which. This left me free to monitor the tracker on Evelyn's car from my computer at home. As soon as I saw the car start moving, I grabbed my keys and followed its signal. Imagine my shock when the tracker led me to Mandy and Carl's house. To my even greater surprise, Jasmine's car was parked right outside. I knew from conversations at the party the night before that Mandy was out of town. I parked my car a block away and approached the house cautiously. Circling to the back, I found the door unlocked. Against my better judgment, I slipped off my shoes, quietly entered, and made my way upstairs, following the sounds coming from above. What I discovered in the master bedroom nearly pushed me over the edge. On the king-sized bed, Brett was having sex with Jasmine while Carl was doing the same with Sue. Every instinct in me screamed to storm in and pummel Brett. My past as a hot-headed juvenile delinquent and my years as an aggressive lacrosse player were begging to be unleashed. But I stopped myself. I'd broken into Carl's house illegally, and any confrontation would likely backfire. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The angles weren't perfect, but I managed to capture 6 explicit shots that clearly showed what was happening. Jasmine's face was unmistakable as she straddled Brett, riding him cowgirl style. Sue's face was just as clear in her own compromising position with Carl. One of the photos even caught Brett's face in full detail. Carl's face wasn't as visible. He was lying face down and farther from where I stood, but anyone familiar with him would recognize the setting as his bedroom. Satisfied that I had enough evidence, I crept back downstairs, slipped on my shoes, and left. Before driving away, I let out some of my pent-up rage by deflating both of the rear tires on Jasmine's car. It was a petty move, but in that moment I didn't care. I drove straight to Evelyn's house, fuming. I had never been so angry in my life, but beneath the fury, there was something else. A feeling I couldn't quite put into words. Over the past few months, my connection with Evelyn had grown into something deeper, something I hadn't allowed myself to fully acknowledge until now. On my way, I called Evelyn and asked her to have some drinks ready. "You're going to need them for what I'm about to tell you," I said. When I arrived, it didn't take long to explain what I'd discovered. Evelyn listened in stunned silence, and then the tears came. "I know I'm nothing but a disfigured," she began, but I cut her off. "Stop," I said firmly. "You don't deserve this. Brett and Jasmine are jerks, just like Carl and Sue. You're worth so much more than this." She wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" "I have a plan," I told her. "But it'll take some time. Can we meet early next week once I've sorted out the details?" Evelyn nodded, her expression hardening with determination. "What do you need me to do?" "For now," I said, "just act like everything's normal. Keep Brett in the dark. Can you manage that?" She wiped away the last of her tears and squared her shoulders. "Yes, I can," she said, her voice steady. Before leaving, I leaned in and kissed her. Not on the cheek this time, but on the lips. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was filled with a passion I couldn't hold back any longer. Evelyn didn't pull away. In fact, she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When we finally broke apart, I smiled at her, then headed to the garage to fix Brett's car. After removing the short circuit I'd installed, I drove home, feeling oddly proud of myself for keeping up appearances with Jasmine over the next few days. The only notable difference in my interactions with Jasmine during those days was that I stopped initiating any intimacy. When she tried to get something started, I came up with a polite excuse. She accepted it without much suspicion. After all, I had never lied to her before, and she had no reason to doubt me. The following days were packed with preparation. On Wednesday afternoon, I met Evelyn at a cafe in the building next to her workplace. I wasn't entirely sure she'd agree to my full plan, but after making a few minor adjustments, she accepted everything. When we parted, it wasn't just with a kiss. It was with a kiss that carried more passion and intensity than either of us had ever felt before. As I walked away, I noticed the warm glow in her expression, and I couldn't help but smile. The plan was set to be fully executed within 3 weeks of that meeting. In the meantime, Evelyn and I continued our twice-weekly sessions, growing closer with each one. Our goodbyes, which had started as simple hugs, had evolved into lingering kisses that neither of us wanted to end. To keep appearances and avoid raising suspicion, I had to sleep with Jasmine occasionally. I treated the act with the same detachment I might feel for a $3 purchase, and, unfortunately, she seemed content with the arrangement. Everything was running smoothly until 1 week before the plan's final execution. That's when my bitterness got the better of me, leading to the third significant event. It was a Saturday evening, and we were at a barbecue hosted by Sue and Rick. Everyone in the usual group was there, and I was glad that it might be one of the last times I'd have to endure their company. While the women were off chatting elsewhere, the men gathered in the backyard. I wasn't drinking, but the others were well into their 6th or 7th beers, swapping exaggerated stories and boasting. What happened next shouldn't have surprised me, given Brett's consistent lack of respect for Evelyn, but it still caught me off guard. He made a degrading comment about her, mocking both the scar on her face and her prosthetic leg. I felt my blood boil. "Why are you such a damn jerk?" I growled, my voice low but firm. "How dare you talk about your wife like that?" I didn't hold back, throwing in a few choice insults that also suggested Brett's relationship with his mother might not be entirely wholesome. My words struck a nerve. Clearly stunned, Brett did something remarkably foolish. Fueled by beer arrogance from his Division III football days, and his natural inclination toward being a jerk, he clenched his fists and advanced on me. "I'll say whatever I want about my wife, you wimp," he snarled. "And I'll mess up your face too. Give you a scar to match hers." He got about half a meter away before I made my move. Without hesitation, I headbutted him square in the nose. The satisfying crunch confirmed I'd broken it, and he crumpled to the ground, groaning and gasping in pain. Apparently inspired by Brett's poor decision-making, Carl decided to take a swing at me. As his fist came toward me, I caught it midair with my left hand. In one fluid motion, I kicked his left knee with my right foot, sending him to the ground. Stepping over his fallen arm, I pressed down and broke it. Dale stood frozen, clearly debating whether to intervene. I pointed at him and growled, "Don't even think about it." He wisely stayed put. Rick, still processing what had just happened, leaned over Brett's writhing body and stammered, "Why did you do that?" "Don't worry too much, Rick," I said coolly. "Brett and Carl have been sleeping with your wife, Sue, for quite some time now. I'll send you the photos in the next few days." At that moment, the women rushed over, all except Evelyn, who stayed back with a faint, satisfied smile on her face. I, on the other hand, was covered in Brett's blood, standing there with a wild look in my eyes as Brett and Carl screamed in pain. Jasmine's voice cut through the chaos. "What did you do, Rob?" she demanded. I turned to her and answered calmly, "Your lovers attacked me, so I beat the crap out of them. Lucky for you and Sue, I didn't crush a few other things while I was at it." As I walked to my car, Jasmine and Sue yelled after me, but their words barely registered. I was already done with all of them. I ignored their shouts as I walked away, not bothering to turn around. Later that night, I was surprised that Jasmine actually came home. By the time she arrived, I was already in bed, hoping to avoid any interaction. She barged into the room, flipping on the overhead light, her face twisted with anger. "Not that you care," she began to rant. "But both Carl and Brett had to go to the hospital. Brett's got a broken nose and a concussion, and Carl has a broken arm and a bruised knee." She clearly wasn't expecting my response. "Turn off the light, you damn adulteress, and get out of my room." "Go sleep in the guest room," I said coldly. Her initial shock was evident, but she quickly snapped back. "You can't talk to me like that." It was the only comeback she could manage. I got out of bed, staring her down with a calm intensity that made her falter. "If you don't get the hell out of here," I said, my voice even but firm, "I'll throw you out myself. You can spend the night outside, or better yet, go take care of your precious buddies. I really don't care." What do you mean?" she stammered, clearly not comprehending, or maybe she was too drunk to connect the dots. I didn't let her finish. Without a word, I walked over, gently but firmly picked her up, carried her out of the room, and deposited her in the hallway. I closed the door, locked it, and slid the security bar under the doorknob for good measure. Jasmine pounded on the door for 5 minutes straight, yelling and demanding to be let back in. I calmly turned on the white noise machine, drowning out her noise. Within 10 minutes, I was fast asleep, as if nothing had happened. The next morning I called Evelyn. "Would you mind speeding up our plans?" I asked. "No, not at all," she replied. "What's your timeline?" "I have something to take care of on Monday, but I'm free any time after that," I said. "I'll set up the server for processing by Tuesday and arrange for the movers to come that day while Brett and Jasmine are at work." Evelyn agreed, her voice filled with a sense of determination that matched my own. On Sunday and Monday, Jasmine made several attempts to talk to me. Each time, I brushed her off, saying, "We'll talk Wednesday morning, not before." That didn't stop her from trying, though. She hovered, asking questions and trying to engage, but I refused to acknowledge her. I didn't share meals with her, avoided all interaction, and kept my focus on what needed to be done. Tuesday morning arrived, and as soon as Jasmine left for work, the movers pulled into the driveway. They quickly loaded everything I wanted to keep into their van, working with quiet efficiency. Once they were done, I followed them to Evelyn's house. Brett was already gone for the day, which made the process seamless. At Evelyn's, the movers packed up all the items she wanted to take with her. As the movers were finishing up, the guy we'd hired to drive Evelyn's car to Austin, Texas, arrived. We handed him the keys and clear instructions, ensuring everything was in place. Once the movers and the driver were on their way, I made a couple of phone calls. The first was to arrange for both Brett and Jasmine to be served with legal papers at their offices simultaneously. The second was to send the explicit photos I'd taken to Rick, Mandy, Brett, and Jasmine. It was a calculated move, but one I felt was necessary to expose the truth. With everything in motion, Evelyn and I stood together watching the final preparations. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and affection. I pulled her into my arms, and we shared a kiss filled with passion and relief. When we finally broke apart, we got into my car, ready to leave behind the lives that had betrayed us and start something entirely new. As we drove away from the Research Triangle area, Evelyn smirked and said, "I can't believe I'm starting a new life, with a new job, in a new city, with a guy I've never even slept with." She gave me a playful glance before adding, That last part will be taken care of when we stop near Atlanta tonight. And you know it's going to be amazing because I love and respect you, and I know you feel the same about me." I grinned at her, unable to hide my excitement. "You're damn right," I replied. Evelyn laughed, leaned over to kiss me on the cheek, and then started chatting about our plans. She talked about the temporary housing we'd arranged in Austin, which was conveniently close to our new jobs, and how excited she was to start looking for a home we'd truly love. That night, I learned a few things about Evelyn, things I had suspected but was thrilled to have confirmed. Her facial scar and the loss of her left leg below the knee didn't diminish our intimacy in the slightest. If anything, her confidence and adaptability made everything even more incredible. She could move her body in ways that brought us both immense pleasure, and her full, round breasts were as enticing as I'd imagined. When you're genuinely in love with someone, leaving behind a bad situation only amplifies the connection. Our first night together wasn't just physically satisfying. It was deeply emotional, a celebration of our newfound freedom and love. Starting a new life with Evelyn was, without a doubt, one of the best decisions I've ever made. The only thing that might rival it is the decision to turn my life around during my foster care years after my troubled youth. In the days following our departure, both Brett and Jasmine tried calling us multiple times. We only answered their initial calls, during which we made it clear that all communication would need to go through our lawyer. Evelyn and I had hired the same attorney, ensuring everything was handled efficiently. We'd already split our cash and securities evenly with our soon-to-be ex-spouses and were prepared to either sell our homes or let them buy out our shares. It was all business at this point, with no room for emotional entanglements. Rick and Mandy also reached out, asking for more details about the photos I'd sent. I gave them a brief explanation and provided the name of the lawyer Evelyn and I were working with. Beyond that, I didn't concern myself with what they chose to do with the information. 7 years have passed since our move to Austin, and I can honestly say my life with Evelyn is perfect. She now has 3 different prosthetics tailored for various situations, including one that allows her to jog comfortably while we push our 2 kids in strollers. At first, Evelyn was self-conscious about wearing anything but long pants in public, hesitant to show her prosthetic. But I made it a point to remind her just how stunning she looked, prosthetic and all. Over time, she gained the confidence to wear shorts and skirts, and now she does so without a second thought. We tell each other, "I love you," every single day, and we mean it wholeheartedly. Our bond is built on respect, trust, and a shared determination to make the most of our lives. As for Brett and Jasmine, we have no idea what they're up to, and honestly we couldn't care less.